the invisible cage of justification. Have you ever felt like, no matter how much you explain yourself, you were still misunderstood? Like every word you offer, every clarification you attempt, only pushes people further away from truly seeing you. You speak, but they don't hear. You open your heart, and they dismiss it. You justify your pain, and they call it weakness. And yet, you keep talking, hoping that maybe if you choose the right words, one day, someone will finally understand you. But what if I told you this instinct to explain is the very thing that's stripping you of your power? Machiavelli once said, "He who seeks to justify himself will be seen as guilty, not because he is, but because the very act of defending, of pleading, of proving, signals weakness to those who feed on control." Every time you explain yourself to someone who has already judged you, you are not building a bridge. You are digging your own psychological grave. The truth is harsh. The more you explain, the less they hear. Because they were never listening. They were measuring how much of yourself you were willing to hand over for a little crumb of acceptance. This isn't communication. It's submission. What if the real prison is not the judgment of others, but your compulsive need to correct their perception of you? What if every time you say, "That's not what I meant," you are quietly begging for permission to exist? You think you're taking back control by explaining, but in their eyes, you are surrendering. And this video isn't here to teach you how to explain better. It's here to help you stop explaining altogether. Because real power begins the moment you realize your truth does not require a courtroom, the puppet pulling its own strings. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this, a puppet, suspended mid-air, tangled in strings. But here's the twist. The strings aren't being pulled from above. They're being pulled by the puppet itself. It jerks, contorts, tries to move, but each movement tightens the knot. Each effort to be free becomes another act of entrapment. And no one is watching. No audience, no puppeteer, just the puppet, dancing for a ghost that isn't there. That puppet is you. Every explanation you offer, every apology you didn't owe, every "I just wanted to say," you whispered into a void. You are the one pulling the strings and calling it communication. But let's call it what it really is. Fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of silence. Fear that if you don't clarify, someone might twist the narrative, and you won't be able to stop it. But here's the thing. The moment you try to control how others see you, you give them control over your identity. You turn yourself into an emotional marionette, moving not by your will, but by the expectations, suspicions, and projections of others. You justify yourself not to be understood, but to be forgiven for simply being. And nothing is more tragic than needing permission to exist. So here's the image I want you to hold. You, standing still. The strings slack. Silence around you. No more movement. No more explanation. Just presence. Because real authority begins when you stop pulling the strings and start letting go of the need to perform. The unseen control you allow. It's easy to say you're being manipulated when someone lies to you, when they gaslight you, when they twist your words into weapons. But what if the manipulation didn't come from outside? What if the one holding the leash is the part of you that can't tolerate being misread? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." But there's another layer to this. Until you recognize the mechanism of control inside you, you'll keep blaming the world for the ways you abandon yourself. Let me show you what this looks like. You walk into a room. Someone questions your tone. Immediately, Your body stiffens. Your heart races. You feel the urge to explain. That's not what I meant. You smile to smooth it over. You say too much. You try to undo a moment that no longer belongs to you. That's not communication. That's panic. Now pause. Where does that panic come from? It comes from the belief that you must be understood to be safe. That unless people see you exactly as you are, something terrible will happen. And where did that belief begin? Maybe it was childhood. Maybe it was that moment when being misunderstood meant punishment, withdrawal, rejection, silence that burned more than shouting ever could. And now, decades later, you're still reacting the same way, not to the world, but to a memory, a phantom, a wound. Nietzsche would call this the herd morality, the desperate attempt to stay in the tribe, even if it costs you your dignity. He said, "The need to be accepted is the most dangerous addiction of all, because once others know you're desperate to be understood, they own you. They can withhold approval and watch you bend. They can stay silent and watch you squirm. And here's the most sinister part. You trained them to do it. Every time you rush to explain, you're teaching the world, I will hand over my peace for your comfort. Every time you say, I just want to make sure you're not upset, what you're really saying is, my reality depends on your interpretation. So what is control really? It's not dominance, it's dependency. The person who cannot tolerate being misunderstood will always be controlled by those who refuse to understand. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are, how articulate. If your inner compass points outward, you are lost. Machiavelli taught that the strongest rulers were the ones who could endure misinterpretation. They didn't explain their moves, they let outcomes speak for them. Because they knew something you haven't fully accepted yet. Explaining yourself is often a way of asking for permission. And if you are asking for permission, you are not free. The fear of being misunderstood. There is a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being seen the wrong way. From realizing that no matter how carefully you speak, people will still hear something else. They'll hear their fear, their projections, their version of you. And that's where the pain begins. Not from abandonment, but from misinterpretation. Not from silence, but from the noise that distorts your truth. You leave conversations feeling more invisible than when you entered. You offer your story, and they reduce it to a label. You say, I'm just tired, and they call you dramatic. You say, this matters to me, and they roll their eyes. And eventually you stop speaking, not out of strength, out of exhaustion. Because every word becomes a battlefield, every sentence an emotional gamble. And so you shrink, you smile, you nod. And somewhere along the way, you forget what your voice used to sound like when it wasn't trying to be approved. You carry the trauma of distortion, of being twisted in the minds of others until you no longer recognize the reflection. Carl Jung called this psychic fragmentation. The moment the self splits under the weight of being seen through other people's eyes. You become a mosaic of other people's misunderstandings, a collage of their insecurities. You are not yourself anymore. You are their idea of you, and the tragedy is, you tried so hard to be clear. But here's the brutal truth. Some people don't want to understand you. They want to win. They want to be right. They want to simplify you because nuance would make them uncomfortable. And if you keep explaining yourself to these people, you are not seeking connection. You are begging to not be erased. That's not communication. That's survival. So now we return to the image. You, in front of a mirror. But the mirror is shattered. Every shard reflects a different version of you, none of them real. And you, desperately piecing them together, hoping someone will finally say, yes, now I see you. But no one does. So what's the alternative? You stop trying to be understood by those who need you to fit inside a box they never questioned. You stop offering clarity where there is no curiosity. You stop bleeding truth into ears that only want noise. Because you are not obligated to correct every misperception. Some things are sacred, and your inner truth, is one of them. The paradox of power: the less you react, the more you command. You've been taught that power is loud, that to be respected, you must speak up, defend yourself, correct them, explain. But what if that's the trap? What if real power lies not in speaking, but in choosing when to remain silent? Machiavelli understood this. He observed that those who react quickly, explain often, and rush to defend themselves reveal one crucial thing: they are not in control. In a world addicted to noise, silence becomes threat. Presence becomes pressure. The one who does not explain terrifies, because silence forces others to sit with their own projections. It becomes a mirror they cannot escape. Nietzsche called this the sovereignty of the self, the ability to exist without asking for permission. It's not about arrogance, it's about containment, keeping your center intact while the world tugs at your edges. When you stop reacting, something shifts. People lean in, they wonder. They start to respect the mystery, because they can't dominate what they don't understand. Most of all, they feel your energy, not scattered across apologies and over-explanations, but focused, rooted. There's a phrase Jung used that applies here: a man who cannot withdraw into himself when necessary is not whole. Withdrawal is not weakness, it is strategy. Because the more you try to explain yourself, the more you affirm the illusion that you owe them something. But you don't. Your truth doesn't require an audience. Your boundaries don't need applause. And your stillness? It speaks louder than any justification ever could. Let that land. Because the moment you stop trying to prove yourself is the moment they start to see you, not through their filters, not through their need to be right, but through the presence you've reclaimed by saying nothing. The collapse of the persona and the return to the center. There comes a moment, quiet, devastating, when you realize that the person you've become is not you. That every explanation you gave, every time you softened your truth to be accepted, every smile that hid your dissonance, it was a performance. You were not trying to be understood. You were trying to be permitted. This is the collapse of the persona, the carefully crafted mask you've worn so long. It almost felt like skin. Carl Jung warned of this danger. He said, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself and others think one is." It's not evil. It's necessary to function, to relate. But the moment you believe you are the persona, you fracture. You feel it in your body, that pressure in your chest, that exhaustion that sleep can't fix, that hollowness after every conversation where you gave too much and received nothing real in return. You feel it in your mind, the endless self-monitoring, the loop of imagined criticisms, the obsession with being clear, reasonable, safe, and most of all, you feel it in your soul. A silence, not of peace, but of absence. You are not here. You are scattered across 1,000 justifications, living in the minds of people who never cared to see you. But here's the turning point. You don't need to explain your collapse. You don't need to narrate your breaking point to those who only ever listen to themselves. Let it break. Let the persona shatter. Because the truth is this: if you have to explain yourself in order to be accepted, you were never accepted. You were tolerated. You were used. And no explanation can turn tolerance into love. No clarity can transform manipulation into understanding. You've spent years trying to be heard, not realizing that every word chipped away at your center. Now, you must choose something different. Not louder words, not sharper arguments, not better performances, but stillness. Let your collapse be your rebellion. Let your silence be the line that cannot be crossed. Because only in that sacred space of not needing, not pleading, not justifying, do you begin to return to your center, to your dignity, to your truth, the silent act of reclaiming power. There is a gesture more powerful than shouting, more powerful than any explanation, any confrontation, any attempt to be understood. It's the gesture of saying nothing and meaning everything. You've tried everything else. You've explained yourself into exhaustion. You've tried to be good, clear, humble, polite, and what did it give you? Misinterpretation, disrespect, silence, not the kind that heals, but the kind that erases. Now, there is only one act left. You stop, not out of pride, not out of revenge, but out of reverence for yourself. Jung called this the moment of individuation, the point at which the false self is discarded and the true self returns from exile. It doesn't require violence. It doesn't require permission. It requires a choice to no longer participate in the performance. You stop explaining. You stop clarifying. You stop trying to control how they see you, because you finally understand. Those who wanted to understand already would have, and those who didn't were never listening to begin with. Your silence becomes your sword. Your boundaries become your shield. And in that space, something forgotten begins to reawaken. Self-respect. Not the kind that needs to be seen, praised, or validated, but the kind that doesn't move when misunderstood. The kind that holds its own weight. The kind that speaks through absence. Imagine this. You say nothing. You walk away. You let the misunderstanding remain, and the world doesn't collapse. But something else does. The illusion that you needed to be decoded to be valuable. You don't. Your silence is not surrender. It is a message written in stone. I am no longer for negotiation. And that is power. Here is the final chapter of the outline, completing the arc with resonance and symbolic closure. The word you never need to say again. Imagine the puppet again, but this time the strings are cut. No movement, no struggle, no performance, only stillness. And in that stillness, sovereignty. There are no more explanations, no more justifications, no more bleeding truth into ears that never wanted to hear it. You have stepped out of the game, and in doing so, you have become illegible to those who once controlled you. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size. But what you refuse to perform, quietly dies." Now you see it. All your life, you thought words would save you. You thought if you could just be clear enough, they would finally understand. But understanding was never the point. Power was. And now you hold it, not because they surrendered, but because you stopped needing them to. There is a moment where silence becomes sacred. Where your refusal to explain is not defiance, but grace. Where you finally say to yourself without sound, I don't owe anyone access to my truth. So I leave you with one question, a question that will echo long after this ends. If you were never misunderstood again, would you still feel the need to explain? Or would you finally be free to simply be?